Switzerland is a sensory place. Its beauty is unquestioned. Its alpine air smells clean. Its landscapes smell of fragrant evergreens and flowers. It just feels fresh everywhere you go. The mention of the name Switzerland has always conjured in my mind a place of neutral isolation, a land seeking peace in a turbulent world. Upon arrival, that feeling of peace seemed to permeate the culture. In the busy city of Zurich, you can't help being struck by the quiet maintained by the near 2 million people living in the city's metropolitan region. The stillness is enchanting, almost alarming for those accustomed to the noise of other modern-day cities. It encourages you to whisper when you speak. There are quiet cars and quiet trains, an almost unbelievable solitude, even on a sunny Friday afternoon in downtown. Zurich boasts being the wealthiest city in Europe, as Switzerland is considered one of the most developed countries in the world. The average citizen's wealth is estimated at more than $500,000. We were quickly told of this, as we were briefed by our guide before our journey. He told us of the wealth flaunted with expensive cars, lavish chalets, and trendy lifestyles. This makes the country a destination for many immigrants trying to jumpstart a new life. More than 20% of Switzerland's population is foreign nationals. We were told they often visit a year or two to work and then return home. Doing so, they endure a phenomenal cost of living. An item costing $100 in nearby Italy often cost $125 to $150 in a Swiss store. Our train trek circumnavigating Switzerland provided eye-popping landscapes and historical novelties. While most countries boast regional dialects, Switzerland takes regionalism to a new level. The country's main language is a Swiss version of German, but when you cross the Alps to the region near France, you'll hear French as the dominant language. Over the Alpine glaciers toward the southeastern border, Italian becomes the dominant language. The Swiss speak Romansh near the Austrian border. To the outsider, it can seem the Swiss try so hard to just get along, they'll adopt a neighbor's language. In Lucerne, toward the center of the country, people speak German. The picturesque city located on the lake of the same name has a population of less than 100,000 living within view of two prominent alpine peaks. The city blossomed on the lake after the Romans left. Among the improvements, several wooden bridges spanning the fast-running Cold Reuss River. It is glacier-fed, which helps refresh the water in Lake Lucerne every 3 or 4 years. While we were there, the water was running at about 66 degrees. Nightclubs abound, including some where artists perform traditional Swiss music and dance, including alpine horns. The long Alp horn's origins are debated, but they've been around since at least the 14th century as musical instruments and communication devices in the tall mountain regions. We were greeted at train stops by some. Switzerland prides itself in many things: chocolate, putting bells on cows, and yodeling. As hard as they try, they can't teach everyone to belt out those famous mountain calls. Maybe it might sound better echoing off a mountain canyon's walls. About 2 hours away by train, on the shores of the huge croissant-shaped Lake Geneva, the city of Lausanne faces France and has been a magnet to travelers for centuries. The Celts that settled the area were later run off by the Romans. It's been a relatively quiet town much of its history, with a few minor skirmishes along the way. A few miles down the shoreline, British poet Lord Byron wrote an epic poem about the Chillon Castle's dungeon near Montreux while he was on a debauched retreat in 1817 with his courtesan Claire Clairmont, along with struggling poet Percy Shelley and his girlfriend Mary, Claire's sister. The group met at the castle, whose history already dated back more than 800 years, as Mary married Shelley that summer and wrote the literary classic Frankenstein about a mad scientist hiding in a castle laboratory, creating a monster from stolen body parts. Byron penned his poem, The Prisoner of Chillon, the tale of a monk's 4-year incarceration in the 1500s in the castle's dank prison with vaulted ceilings. There are 7 pillars of Gothic mold in Chillon's dungeons deep and old. There are 7 columns, massy and gray, dim with a dull imprisoned ray. Lord Byron's words of how he imagined the world centuries before him seemed to echo off the walls and pillars of Chillon, where people once were chained in the dank, dark confines of the prison behind thick wooden doors. More than 150 years later, Montreux would inspire the famous guitar riff of the rock band Deep Purple, whose popular song, Smoke on the Water, was the story of a 1971 casino fire sparked during a performance by Frank Zappa during the 3-day jazz festival. The members of Deep Purple watched the building burn from a nearby lakeshore restaurant. The terraced hillsides sport acres upon acres of grapes cultivated since the Roman times around Montreux and Lausanne. Riding the rails from the shores of Lake Geneva to the alpine reaches of Zermatt takes you through some of the most picturesque landscape imaginable. Quaint towns and villages line the valleys beneath imposing icy glaciers and majestic towering mountains that at times have come crashing down and buried entire communities in a matter of minutes. From the streets of Zermatt, the immense peak of the Matterhorn is visible. Although often shrouded in fog, it stood stately in crystal blue skies for us. As night fell, the moon bathed the mountain in its light, giving the rocky crags an eerie glow until sunrise kissed the crest and slipped slowly down its sides. Almost all vehicles in Zermatt are battery-driven. Most gas-propelled cars are parked in nearby villages. An electric train hauls visitors on a half-hour ride up the slopes some 5,000 feet to the Gornergrat, which sits at an altitude of more than 10,200 feet. Around the hotel and observatory, multiple glaciers shove their way between the rocky peaks over the Matter Valley. In the summer, the melting ice forms streams that race down the slopes, feeding a myriad of rivers that flow into thousands of lakes across the Swiss countryside. That explains why hydroelectric power is the main source of electric energy in the country. Harnessing the rushing waters seemed like a no-brainer to Swiss authorities. The lakes also provide a recreation area, enjoyed by many during the long summer days. Car and railway tunnels carved through dozens and dozens of mountains, some longer than 50 miles in length, provide easy transit across the country. The electric Glacier Express cars traverse many tunnels between Zermatt and the glitzy town of St. Moritz on the Italian border. Snuggled under the mountains dotted with pastures and vineyards, St. Moritz twice hosted the Winter Olympic Games in the first half of the 20th century. The town's population of just over 5,000 prides itself with displaying elegance and style to the tens of thousands of tourists that visit each year. Many get around the town by bus, when they can find them. Rising about 3,000 feet above the western end of the city stands one of the most exclusive resorts in the region, the hotel and panoramic restaurant Motas Morgal, accessible by an inclined rail car that rolls up a hillside passing horses, cows, and marmots. the resort sports incredible picturesque views of the valley below. A short train ride from St. Moritz is the Italian border, where towns like Tirano benefit from the close proximity to the Swiss alpine resorts. Tirano has few tourist attractions of its own beyond the Cathedral of Madonna di Tirano. The townspeople built the religious shrine after a man reported the apparition of the Madonna appeared to him at dawn one September day in 1504 and promised to end the plague raging in the region if they built a church in her honor on that exact spot. A half year later, they began the task and continued creating the ornate homage for the next quarter century. The trains from Switzerland squeeze by the church and nearby houses and cafes, entering and leaving the city to return to the land of mountains and lakes. It's a place of beautiful landscapes, green in the summer, accented by snowy peaks, towering over it all like stone giants. Switzerland, a peaceful land, majestic, and full of nature's beauty and power.